Brands that are tapping into campaigns for social justice to connect with consumers. Is it wrong to make money from such movements? Should we be cynical about this? You're watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. The slogan T-shirt with a feminist message, a necklace engraved with the words "Me Too." For some sellers, the issue or issues of the moment are a quick way to make a quick dollar. For others, social justice movements are incorporated into marketing campaigns to attract customers with varying results.
We live in an age of heightened social awareness, where movements gain momentum online and brands can easily tap into the issues people care about, making a connection with consumers for commercial gain. But should capitalism and activism go together? The power of online movements has grown in societies around the world. The hashtags #MeToo and Time's Up have trended across social media, fueling real-world reactions. Millions of women spoke out against sexual assault, harassment, and abuse of power. But as support grew, so too did the opportunities to make money from merchandise. The female dollar is lucrative for brands, with women driving 70 to 80% of consumer spending. Global consumers are also willing to put their money where their heart is. Marketing company Nielsen found 55% of online consumers are willing to pay more for products from brands that consider the environmental and social impact. Millennials are another profitable market. In a recent Forbes study, 75% of millennials said it's important that brands they buy give back to society. In some instances, corporate support has led to greater awareness of social issues, such as gender inequality, civil rights, and climate change. But are brands and advertisers being honest? Critics are skeptical of feel-good advertising in a competitive market, and when those brands get it wrong, it can be costly. When New York taxis went on strike to protest against President Donald Trump's so-called Muslim ban, Uber raised its prices, leading 500,000 users to delete their accounts, and the hashtag #DeleteUber began trending online, pressuring Uber to apologize. Last year, a Pepsi advert featuring model Kendall Jenner fell flat. It was accused of trivialising the struggle the Black Lives Matter movement faced, causing widespread anger and mockery online. Brands have been accused of using these movements without contributing to the cause, listening to those affected, or understanding the issues. Is brand activism disingenuous? Are companies simply cashing in on the millennial trend for greater corporate social responsibility? And even if they are, is the message more important?
Very pleased to say that with me to kick this around at the round table, we have Alex Holder, a writer and former advertising executive. We have Wendy Hein, who researches and teaches marketing at Birkbeck, part of the University of London. Otegha Uwagba, writer and brand consultant with me too, and Paul Mead, founder and chairman of VCCP Media, now describes himself as a consultant but still in the business. Thanks very much for coming in. Alex, let me ask you, because you wrote an article in The Guardian talking about the way things have changed. I wanted to know, when I read that, whether you sincerely believe that companies can do these for the right motives, in other words, for social justice, or whether they're simply doing it because they know they're going to get more money, better profits.
I don't think you can separate the fact that people might want to do it for the right motives and the fact that it still benefits their profit. So consumers are looking to brands, to engage with brands that have social conscience, that are kind of doing good in the world, because it makes the consumer feel good and also the brand benefits. So there's kind of...
You see, the cynic in me says, yeah, okay, somebody identifies something that looks good, that benefits them because the consumer thinks it's the right thing to do, but at the end of the day, they don't really care.
I think there are some brands that do care. You know, there might be the Body Shops and the Patagonias of this world, but then there are brands which it's definitely a marketing ploy. I think last year, the Audi ran a Super Bowl ad that was all about equal pay. And then actually when people looked into the company Audi, and it was a US ad, and there were 14 top execs, only 12 of them were men, only 2 women, and equal pay wasn't at the heart of their company.
But that's stupidity, isn't it? That's not necessarily being cynical about it. I mean, if you say you're in for equal pay, then you've got 12 out of 14 that are all men. I mean, that's just bonkers.
Well, I think that shows one of the pitfalls that brands need to be careful about, and one of the reasons why brands shouldn't just jump on the sort of activism bandwagon if consumers are incredibly savvy. I think maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, brands that were kind of dipping their toe into activism would probably have gotten away with it, but now people know to kind of dig a little bit deeper, look into the claims that the brands are making, and yeah, someone like Audi are going to find themselves pulled up over their employment practices.
Well, the world is changing, isn't it? I mean, the people who are buying products, let's talk about the young market, and some older ones as well, people who are buying the products are more aware of what is going on, or at least what is said about what is going on, yeah?
Mm-hmm. In most categories, there isn't much difference between products and services. There's a sea of sameness. If I buy my insurance from company A versus company B, or washing powder A versus washing powder B, there isn't much difference. It's the brand advertising that tries to tell you that you're this kind of mum if you buy this kind of product, or you're this kind of person if you buy another kind of product. So the opportunity, although the risks are huge, the opportunity to say something that resonates with your customers by getting involved in activism in a genuine way is big. Higher risk, but potentially higher reward.
Funny old world, though, isn't it? I mean, where you do something perhaps because you believe in it, but you then have to shout about it and look totally immodest at the same time.
Well, I think that just goes to show, I think the brands are really kind of doing it with the core reasons. They probably aren't talking about it as much. It's maybe quiet donations that you might not hear about it. But obviously, there is an element of, you know, true altruism isn't something that people sort of talk about and broadcast. And so you do kind of have to take a little bit with a pinch of salt. Even brands that do amazing things. I think it was Lyft that donated like $1 million to the ACLU because of Trump's travel ban as a result of that. But they did tell people about it, and obviously that then impacted Lyft's downloads and sales. So I think there always has to be a pinch of salt taken with it.
They can get as much reach from doing a charitable donation and telling people as they can from putting that into an advert and putting the advert out.
Yeah. Wendy, you were a marketing executive.
Yes.
Now you examine marketing and teach it. It's what Otegha was just saying, the idea of from corporation to a community of citizens. You recognise that phrase?
Well, we could argue that there is an increasing notion of citizenship and the consumer citizen and the responsible consumer, the consumer who would desire to be seen as politically active and engaged, but I think just as much, it suits just as much the consumer to some degree as it does the corporations, because consumers actually are not necessarily willing to give up their time and their job to go on the street and march for some of the issues that are being discussed and that are being put forward, just as much as corporations are not happy to sacrifice their entire systems and their entire structures to actually get engaged and get really engaged with the social issues at hand.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I feel like one of the dangers with brand activism and brands kind of labeling themselves as people who are kind of looking for social good is that it then sort of lulls consumers into a false sense of security that by downloading this app or by buying my washing powder from this brand as opposed to that brand, they're doing their bit for the cause, which very often is not the case. The vast
Did we not see this with Dove fairly recently, when they launched this beauty campaign that involved cross-section of society, and then one of the models that they got in had said something that Dove could not approve.
Exactly, Munro Bergdorf, who was fired by... Oh, actually, no, sorry, I think that's...
It was L'Oreal.
It was L'Oreal.
It was L'Oreal, sorry. Yeah, but I mean, Dove had the lightening of the skin business as well.
I haven't seen that. I mean, Dove have come under a lot of criticism. So they're owned by Unilever. Dove did this campaign, well, their big kind of famous campaign was the Dove campaign for real beauty. They were one of the first people to put, you know, women with attainable beauty standards on TV. But at the same time, Unilever also own Axe or Lynx, which was running adverts with kind of model perfection women. You know, I think their catchphrase was, or slogan was, spray more, get more. And so in one ad break, you'd have Dove saying, you can, you know, be whoever you are, look however you are, feel beautiful, and at the same time, you know, but you're only going to be attractive to men if you're this kind of hairless, tanned.
Lynx is that terrible deodorant that teenage boys seem to use, isn't it?
Yeah, obviously very different market, and it's, you know, it's a different personality that each of those brands is, you know, is trying to put across. But I think, you know, the risks of brand activism, even for those people who do it really well, take Patagonia, which is built around...
Well, explain to us why they're doing it.
Well, they do it really well because it's genuine. The founder, Schoenard, it was a mountain climber and an environmentalist before starting the company. So it's genuine, it comes from the top. You know, they donated all of their Black Friday sales revenue to environmental causes. They give 1% of their annual sales to environmental causes. So it feels genuine because it comes from the top. But even they are not without blemish. When you put yourself out there, there will always be people who are trying to pick holes in it. It was found that within their supply chain, they had some issues around sort of not exactly slavery, but they had some sort of welfare issues within the supply chain. And this is a company that is held up as the paragon of brand activism.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is, if you put yourself out there as a brand with any kind of cause or with anything, you will be open to this kind of backlash.
I'm going to come to the three of you because you've worked in it most recently. But Wendy, let me ask you this one first of all. When you were in marketing and selling products, did you see people jump on the bandwagon because they felt it was the right thing to do?
Yes, of course. I mean, I think
Not for any other motive?
Of course, we all have different motives. They wouldn't possibly say publicly that they're doing this because they are switched on by the particular message, but often there are various different underlying motives that are, you know, playing a role in this too. But I think ultimately the issue is that we are all attracted not just by what certain things do for us, but what they say about us. And I think there's absolutely nothing new in this. The one thing that I would say is that this is not activism. And to say that this is a kind of a brand activism is a new kind of brand in marketing in its own right. And speaking of different sort of executives and the various different titles and brands you may have on that in itself isn't activism. To sort of frame this as some kind of an activist idea.
Is it what my son calls virtue signalling?
Sorry?
Is it virtue signalling? Saying we are good because we do this, even though perhaps we don't believe in it. And the people who buy the products, perhaps they're doing the same thing, to say, look, you know, I'm wearing a Patagonia jacket at the moment. That says something about me.
Of course.
I mean, it's ultimately none of us are really having to sacrifice anything for what we say we believe in. It's like this kind of cycle of smugness. The brand feels great because they're putting something out there. The consumer feels great. But, you know, I'm still drinking the coffee I drink every single day. I'm driving a nice car.
Still throwing away that plastic cup.
Yeah, I've still got, you know, Lyft. You know, you swap Uber for Lyft, and it took 5 minutes to download a new app.
And are their labour practices any better?
Yeah.
And did you do, or in your recent careers, have you done something that you felt perhaps you've done simply for corporate motives rather than social responsibility motives? It's fess up time.
Yeah, I mean, if you work in advertising, you're all sellouts, and you're working for the brands. And I mean, ultimately, brands doing good still benefits the brand. Like I said, it's still their profit line.
Anything that keeps you awake at night?
Yes.
Anybody? Oh, yeah, okay. Well, you can decide in a minute whether you're going to tell us what that actually is. But you two over here, same thing?
I mean, I've definitely worked on briefs with brands where the motive is just, you know, pure profit and driving business and sales, and I am absolutely fine with that. I think what would feel, I suppose, morally dubious to me is where, and I have had occasions where clients have suggested jumping on a bandwagon in order to sort of get attention and gain profit, and I've actually been really vocal in saying that they shouldn't do that.
And is that because you think it's the wrong thing to do, or because it's easy to spot a fraud?
Both. Personally, I feel like it's morally dubious if they're not actually going to back themselves with it and actually put time, money, effort, resources into whatever cause that they want to bandwagon. And also because it's really, really obvious. Like I said earlier, consumers are really savvy when it comes to this sort of thing, and they are looking for brands to trip up because it's funny. So, yeah, I don't think brands should just be jumping into it lightly, essentially.
So if you've done something like this, Paul, and I don't know whether you have, you know, been part of a campaign that sells itself as something which it actually isn't, do you consider that to be lying?
Well,
or is all advertising lying to some extent?
Well, certainly, you know, advertising is trying to create an image or an impression of a product or a business, and you know, with different brands, that can be closer or further removed from the truth. I mean, I think that the general public are, you know, have a good level of cynicism. You know, I think cynicism is a very powerful thing. I think that because we've got things like social media now, that cynicism can build into a backlash very quickly. And I think that's actually the reason why more brands don't do this kind of thing. Because if you think about it from a brand's perspective, maximization of profit is not the purpose of a company. It's not a brand purpose. Maximization of profit is an outcome of being a good company for your customers, for your employees, and for the world in general. And a lot of companies are thinking about that kind of thing. And whether you call it activism or whether you call it greater social responsibility, but I think a lot of brands genuinely want to do the right thing because actually they know it's good for business.
Wendy, do you buy that argument? Sorry, I'll come to you. Do you buy that argument that companies aren't in it just to maximise profit?
Well, I would.
I'm not saying they're not in it to maximise profit, they are. But what I'm saying is they're aligned. My son will sell cakes for a charity at a charity stall for his Cub Scouts. Now, he's doing it because he gets a badge. The charity still gets its donation. So what I'm saying is, if this whole world is about brands moving towards doing a bit more good in the world, and let's say they're all doing it incredibly cynically, what does it matter?
Okay, there's a synergy. You see a synergy.
Well, I think what does
Alex,
matter.
I don't want to come back to you in just a moment, but Wendy was itching to say something.
Well, I would certainly take that with a pinch of salt because if we, again, going back to the argument, what activism actually is and what it is that brands are doing, brands are, at this point in time, giving consumers the resources to present themselves as politically active. These are not necessarily resources or objects or signs or symbols as we see on their placards, unless, of course, it's a Gucci or Chanel runway, which in its own right has its limitations, which is what happened, if you remember the Karl Lagerfeld, I think it was the Chanel collection, which was the feminist collection. This was a few years ago, I think it was 2015.
Yeah. We should all be feminists.
Where models were walking down the runway with placards, and this was a fashion statement when the company, certainly in its own right, would be quite questionable in terms of its own understanding of feminism. And this is precisely the problem. If what is happening on the street was happening in activist terms, is entirely different, a different story as to what's happening in the corporate world. And the margin, sort of that gaze that is being opened up by Dove Real Beauty is pathetic. It's absolutely outrageous. If we think of various different sort of idealizations of beauty, you're still asking me to be beautiful. You're still objectifying me by asking me to be, just tell me to be a person. Just tell me to be a woman, for God's sake, even in that terms.
I was always pretty cynical about the Dove Real Beauty campaign,
but I think
because they use professional models anyway, all sorts of, they street cast very beautiful real women. So
I want to ask you
think it was
in a minute how much things have changed.
It's a little bit cynical.
In your time. You wanted to say something, Alex, and I don't know whether that's because you wanted to say something to avoid being asked once again about what you've done in marketing or advertising of which you are ashamed and which keeps you awake at night, but I'm coming back to that if you don't answer it now.
Well, I'll say what I want to say and then I'll answer that. I think I think we're right to be cynical because I think if brands offer us kind of small gestures to be an activist, what that can do is it can make us feel so smug that we don't do the big things. And I think even kind of socially on our social media, I'll repost a Gloria Steinem quote. That doesn't make me Gloria. And I think it's stopping us actually going out there and trying to change the world.
Okay.
But now when I admit to what the bad things I've done, I think I perpetuated really terrible stereotypes in advertising for a long time. Things like that only women eat yogurt, or only men can be bosses. Often in the casting of adverts that I put out there, I didn't challenge it enough. And I definitely regret that.
Well, I wouldn't worry too much about the yogurt one, but I think that the only men can be bosses has probably got more of a resonance. Do you think your industry's changed much?
There's a reason I've left it daily. No,
let's be clear, you're still allied to it, you're still a consultant, although you are mostly a writer these days. Okay, carry on. You both inhaled, as I said, has it changed, as though something...
I think there's a lot of change to be done still.
I think it has changed. I mean, the bottom line is that if you look at what's going on in the world and what the general public, consumers in the sort of brand's language, what they care about, it's forcing advertisers to change. There are lots of things that, and I agree completely that we're only sort of taking sort of baby steps towards that, but change is definitely in the air. I mean, things even that would have happened 2 or 3 years ago are not happening right now in terms of sort of gender diversity, or lots of these issues. Brands are incredibly aware and sensitive because of the fact that we talked about earlier. It will impact their profit if they don't consider these things, and there can be a backlash very, very quickly.
Yeah, and there was a sharp intake of breath, I have to say, when I said have things changed, as though you thought perhaps they had, but not necessarily for the better, or not far enough.
Yeah, I think just not far enough. I think my experience of working in advertising, and like Alex, I left a couple of years ago and I'm still kind of allied to it. I still consult for brands, still work for agencies occasionally. And my experiences of it weren't great in terms of diversity and social progressiveness. And it feels like if change is happening, it's happening very slowly, it's happening very reluctantly. And I do think the motive for that is almost entirely cynical, which is, an agency will say, oh, our clients are demanding more diversity, or our clients are demanding this and that. It's not coming from a place of sort of any kind of moral...
It's coming from in the heart.
No, it's not. It's coming from, we need to do this in order to gain more clients, in order to make more money.
The fact is, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, aren't you?
Well, actually, to be the cynic here, I to some degree disagree that if you touch some of those buttons, that this may not actually lead necessarily to profits. If we look at the Protein World example, for example, it was a tiny company before it had its campaign on Get Beach Body Ready. And the entire movement on social media, that the outrage that it caused, actually gave the company massive visibility. And
So bad publicity helped because there's no such thing as bad publicity.
Oh, I disagree with the idea there's no such thing as bad publicity. It happens a lot these days where a brand... yeah, no, of course. And I think sometimes when a brand campaign, I remember when the Pepsi brand campaign with Kendall Jenner really backfired, and I saw a lot of chatter about, oh, they probably did it deliberately, they wanted to backfire. Having worked for brands and worked in agencies, they do not want that. They do not want bad publicity.
Okay. But to your point about a small brand, though, that is a big opportunity for a brand that is not already a household name. Pepsi, you've got everything to lose. A new brand has got everything to gain.
True.
And that's true also with associating with things that brands never used to get involved in, like politics. Now, there are big opportunities to say, I'm left, I'm right, I'm Trump, I'm anti-Trump. Because you're better off polarising your audience, losing half of them, and the half that remains are twice as engaged, they're double the advocacy, and that is... that's
Wendy,
a good move for
What are you teaching our brand managers of tomorrow? Are you saying to them, find out what matters to your consumers? In other words, whether it be Black Lives Matter or whether it be, anything, social activism, or are you saying be very, very careful about that?
I would say, well, first of all, be certainly very careful. Do get engaged, but get to know the complexity of the issue. This isn't just a surface level that you should be scratching. If you really want to get engaged with this, then get engaged. Get everybody on board. Make this your message. Make this your interest. And don't just think that this is going to be
But isn't part of the difficulty that if you start to follow what's trendy today, it won't necessarily be what matters in a week or 10 days, 6 months' time?
No.
Then you'd have to go shift with the wind, and then you look like you don't really care about it.
That is exactly the point. If you actually engage with this in a meaningful way across the complexity, in a structural way, in a systematic way, not just on surface brand, say what you have to say, but across a systematic change, then you are actually in with a chance of getting involved and not just involved.
So you have to be genuine, you have to believe.
Authentic, yes.
Otherwise you're going to come across as a fraud.
Potentially.
Alex?
I've got a bigger question, which is it doing the causes any good? So Nissan have just released an ad. So in Saudi Arabia this year, in 2018, June, women are going to be allowed to drive. It's like a big historic ruling. And Nissan have done an advert celebrating that with the hashtag #SheDrives. On the one hand, they're getting that, I guess, giving airtime to that movement and the fact that, it's obviously a brilliant thing that's happening. But then they're watering down quite a historic moment to a kind of throwaway hashtag.
And they're
#SheDrives.
capitalising it once it's already happened. Where was Nissan 2 years ago making an advert pushing Saudi Arabia to allow women to drive?
Yeah.
They're doing it now.
At the same time, it's building awareness. And although some of the brands, you could argue that they're clumsy or you could argue that they're not genuine, but, in a kind of connected world, it's strange to argue that brands don't have a role in making it a better place or in helping with some of these movements that.
But does Nissan make that movement?
Or not?
Is it Nissan making that movement feel like it's done?
Nissan's a
like
peripheral brand. It's already happened, and Nissan's a peripheral brand. It's part of it, but it isn't. It's not the centre piece of it. Yes, it's getting involved. You could argue about whether that's the right thing or not, but it's on the sidelines with it.
We have a limited amount of time on this programme. It's sort of like a limited spend on an ad campaign, and unfortunately our budget, our time is just about run out. But I want to just bring to everybody's attention something I showed you guys beforehand, which is how far advertising campaigns have come. Maybe the motives are not quite right. Perhaps they are looking after good causes. This is one for Winston cigarettes. I don't know whether you'll see it on screen, but I'll certainly read it out to you. Taste, this is from the 60s. Taste isn't the only reason I smoke. And she's pregnant. People are always telling me that smoking causes low birth weight. Talk about a win-win. An easy labour, a slim baby, and a full flavour of Winston. Times really, really have changed, and that's what we've been debating. Thank you very much, all of you, for taking part in this conversation. And thank you for watching this edition of Roundtable. From me, David Foster, and the team. See you next time, I hope. Bye-bye.